In English class, we just finished reading Half-Hanged Mary by Margaret Atwood, a pretty dog-shit poem in general. A lot of the metaphors and similes are just purposefully vague and nebulous in a way that's just making it hard to understand for no reason except to seem superior to the people who can't understand it, which is everyone, even the people who say that they can understand it. Just like purposefully inaccessible in a way that hails to the late 1800s. Look up the progression of art historically, as the lower classes became more literate, the upper classes needed to make their art even more inaccessible and even more abstract in order to feel superior and to feel rarefied and separate, and it doesn't make the art better at all. But the one aspect that I want to focus on while tearing this poem apart, it does not rhyme. This is something that I've noticed among so many different poems these days. I actually got published in Minimag, a magazine that publishes art and poetry and stories, and I was published right beneath a really short poem that did not rhyme, which is actually decent enough. Like, it was very short, so I could tolerate it in just that little dose. But, I do not like these poems that don't rhyme. A lot of poets are like, no, you don't understand, it's sophisticated, it's fine, rhyming is the way of the past, blah, blah, blah. The Economist actually had a pretty decent article about this, about how poems are just not rhyming anymore, about how the biggest contestants in a bunch of poetry contests are not rhyming. You can go look for that online, it's pretty interesting. But this trend, it doesn't deepen the art in any way. Let's begin with that. Let's start by striking down the claims that the poets make. Basically, you're not writing a poem anymore. You're just turning it into some other form of art. And I know people will say, no, what are you talking about? It's still a poem. It's just a poem that doesn't rhyme, because rhyming is the way of the past, and we need to be new. We need to come up with something more sophisticated in order to feel better about ourselves. That's not a poem. And yes, there's this literary foundation that says it's a poem. There's that big person that says, well, according to this definition of poetry, writing that's just designed to be beautiful, which could that's so catch-all. That's like define chess as a sport. According to that, this is a poem. Call me a Luddite if you wish, but I will never, ever consider a poem that does not rhyme as actually being a poem. Because whether or not it's technically a poem according to this or that person, the fundamental point that I'm trying to make here is that you have ripped the core out of poetry. The only advantage that poetry has over stories is that poetry has rhythm. Besides that, you just have a very, very poorly formatted short story that's trying to feel better about itself. At that point, the better way to communicate something without rhyming is either with an essay or with a short story. If you're going for poetry, then you don't really have much in the way of rhythm, and then the core of poetry is gone. Any other type of art will accomplish what that poem is trying to accomplish better. I'm not huge into poetry in the first place, but some poetry can be good. The poetry that's good is the poetry that makes use of rhythm in order to communicate something in a way that a story could not. Okay, so you've completely ripped out the core of poetry, removed the only advantage that it has over other art forms, and destroyed a model of art that has been working for hundreds upon hundreds of years, thousands. I don't know how long poetry's been rhyming, but I would imagine even longer than hundreds of years, to be honest. I don't know, I don't dig art history. Okay, ripped all that away, scuppered it, and left it with basically nothing, and you're arguing that it's poetry, which is kind of a pedantic argument at this point. Why? What on earth did you do this for? Honestly, I think the answer lies with just feeling better about themselves. Artists need to constantly be innovating. They need to be coming up with pointillism, with abstract art, with this and that, in order to feel better about just doing the same thing that other people have been doing before you. They want to feel that they're doing something new. Because as a creative, you want to be creative in your creativeness, which, okay, I get, but the creativeness just coming from actually making another poem or another story within the same kind of artistic mold just feels too stifled to some. The thing is, while it has occasionally led to some interesting things and some useful advances, such as the move away from literary romanticism towards literary realism in books in the late 1800s, which I personally am really glad for. I'm way, way more like literary realism than romanticism. But in most cases, it just doesn't lead to all that much good. That's why we have Picasso. That's why we have abstract art. The existing models exist for a reason. They're popular, they're ubiquitous for a reason, because they work. Because these methods of communicating information and aesthetics and ideas to readers works. And at the end of the day, I don't really think that it matters if the vehicle of transmitting the idea is unique, as long as the idea that you're transmitting is unique. And I think that painters, for example, really lost their way when the point of creating a painting, for example, or I guess just any kind of visual art, like with a banana taped to the wall, that's not a painting, or like a blank, like the base of a statue with nothing on it, it's an invisible statue. When art became more so about the method of conveying nothing, rather than using the standard method to convey something, they just lost their way. Artists need to stop trying to be sophisticated. The old models work for a reason. Make things that people can understand and that actually appeal to regular people. Rarefying it more just makes it enjoyable for no one. Any old fool can enjoy an enjoyable thing, but it takes a true connoisseur to enjoy something that's absolute shit. Except those true connoisseurs don't really enjoy it all that much either. It provides no value to art, and they're not really saying anything new. They're just wrapping it up in a new tight little bow and calling it a day. And it does nothing for poetry, it does nothing for writing, and poets and writers should just leave that whole idea behind.